Hi, I'm Chris Brown, and this is Module 1.10 in an Introduction to Axiomatic Design. And so for the next few minutes, we're going to be talking about design reviews. So how do we review designs within the context of axiomatic design? So here's something to think about. Design engineers, design your design process. Sort of like physician, heal yourself. So this is part of the design process. So let's take a look. What is a design review? So generally what happens is somebody comes up with a design, or maybe some subgroup, and then it needs to be evaluated in a group. And so evaluated and perhaps modified. So what's the objective? Well, what we want to do is exploit the potential of the teams in design work. Meetings are kind of expensive when you think about the number of person hours that are expended and how fast they can be expended when you have several people in the room. Now, that being said, there are some sort of limits on what we would like to have for the number of people in the room when we're trying to do a design review, and we'll talk more about that later. Now, there's a professor at USC, Stephen Liu, who has come up with this interesting term, collaborative negotiation for design work. And that's what we're doing, essentially, when we're doing a design review. We're negotiating, but it's a collaborative and not a confrontational kind of negotiation. At least that's what it should be. And so what we want to do here is learn a little bit about how to manage a design review and how to effectively critique design projects. So design is a collaborative negotiation, design reviews. So one of the things we want to do, and one of the things axiomatic design is supposed to do, is to keep us from doing non-productive iterations. So we want to monitor the discussion and see if we have some sort of excessive iterations, and if the iterations are leading very quickly to convergence or not. Are we reaching a consensus? And that's often the objective that we're trying to achieve. When we have a consensus, how do we know when we're done? How do we know when the design is good? Basically, when people stop objecting to it, or everybody's on board, and we've achieved a consensus. So, at least among the key people, or at least among the person who's going to take the responsibility for the design. So there's different kinds of design organizations you might have. But here's something to consider. According to Calvin, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. So let's think about this in regard to, say, the value added during the design process. How do we see what the value is during the design? How do we measure the quality of a design solution? And how do we measure progress in a design review? If we can't measure these things, according to Calvin, then we can't improve them. Or at least we can't know if we've improved them. So there is some value, of course, in being able to measure design quality. We would like to be able to select the best design solutions early in the development process of the design. That allows us to focus our resources and to reduce the uncertainty in predicting the success of a design outcome. We would like to avoid rushing to a particular design solution that might not be the best. And as I said, we want to be able to focus resources on the best design solution and do that with a reasonable degree of certainty. In order to do that, we need to be able to build a consensus. So if we can do this, we reduce cost by getting a better product. So the most expensive product, no matter how much it looks like it costs, the most expensive one will be a bad product. Importantly, too, we can reduce time to market, and there's value in that. So what do we measure for the quality of the design solution? The compliance with the axioms. So the best designs are going to be the ones that best comply with the design axioms. How do we measure the progress in the design solution? How far have we gotten along in the decomposition? So we could get a long ways along in the decomposition with a bad quality design. So as long as we're complying with the axioms, and developing the design decomposition, then we can use the level of the decomposition as a measure of progress. Now, traditionally, there are checklists and then prints or CAD files, and engineers have to run around and get signatures from people who are busy and don't have time often to look at the design or try to evaluate it. They're trying to evaluate it without using the axioms. There's often not a good system for evaluating the design. And the most important thing can be just sticking to the timetable. If we use axiomatic design, we can look at, as we were saying, the extent of the decomposition and the compliance with the axioms for the design progress. Now, where is the foundation for consensus? Because consensus is important for being able to progress in the design. Well, first we have to agree on axiomatic design. So then we have the evaluation criteria, the compliance with the axioms. We have the structure, so we have the domains and the hierarchies, and we can measure progress by how far we are in the decomposition of the structure. And so then we go with simple steps, simple and clear steps. Now, communication, of course, is essential for building consensus. And design intent often isn't obvious unless it is recorded. So good formulation of the FRs records the design intent. Now, this is important, particularly at the upper level, to get good FRs at the upper level. And it is well worth the effort, although for a while it seems non-productive, particularly if design progress is measured by CAD files or some sort of print. Because before we do that, we should know the intent at the upper level. We should develop the themes for the design, and we'll talk later about how these help develop the good FRs. Sometimes we need to work on definitions. We're using words in a special way when we're doing design, or we're using a more restricted meaning than we might use commonly. So often we want to have a design solution specific dictionary, one that we develop so we know how we're doing things. Bandwidth in a design review is important, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. So here's some tips. It's good to have a leader and maybe a coach. Could be the same person. Sometimes it's different. A coach might be somebody with more experience with axiomatic design. A leader needs to keep order. The coach is maybe monitoring progress and noting whether there's changes in the decomp or notes added in the design file. So we need to project the decomposition. And so we need somebody dedicated to the keyboard. So often the decomposition is going to be shown in software like Aclaro or perhaps Excel. And then somebody needs to be there so they're reflecting the discussion. And then we can build consensus by modifying FRs and DPs or adding notes. Now, a key thing is giving people a chance to express themselves. This is the third bullet down. Smart people get bored easily, particularly if they're not expressing themselves. So we need to make sure that we have that opportunity. One of the ways of doing that is to have plenty of whiteboards around the room so that people can get up and write or draw while others are talking. We can multitask, we can listen and draw at the same time. Another way is have extra projectors that people can connect to, and everybody has a computer, and obviously you need extra screens to go with them. All right, so steps in developing a design solution. And we've been through these before. Identify the customer needs, develop the FRs and the DPs at the highest levels so they're consistent with the customer needs and with the constraints. Select DPs for the corresponding FRs. Check for compliance with axiom 1 and axiom 2 and with the constraints. Modify and consider alternatives to be in compliance with the axioms and the constraints, and then iterate again. And keep iterating until you're at a low enough level so that the solution is obvious. All right, so how do we review a design solution with a group? And what are the steps there? Well, we'd like to start with a proposed solution. So often we take a subgroup or an individual and say, can you come up with an initial design for us, and then we'll review it. So we want to critically examine this and propose alternatives. So the first thing is we need to understand what the consumer needs and constraints are. And is this a complete list? And this is something we'll talk more about in the second part of this of axiomatic design, the intermediate level. The FRs, top down, each level, each branch, need to be reviewed. And so this is what we're looking for in the FRs. First of all, correct formulation. Is it imperative? Does it start with a verb? Are the CNs addressed? Are the children logical? All right, and I stress children because if you have one child, you have a single child decomposition, which isn't a real decomposition, as we've discussed. So we need at least 2 children for each parent. Are they collectively exhaustive? All right, so did we satisfy all the CNs? Is there anything else we need to do? Are they mutually exclusive? If they're not, we can't satisfy axiom 1 if the FRs are coupled, and we'll take a closer look at the consequences of having coupled FRs in the intermediate section. And is this a minimum number? Do we have more FRs than we need? Can we reduce the number of FRs somehow? Then let's look at the corresponding DPs. So are they in the correct formulation? Do they start with a noun because they have to represent the physical space? Can we test them against the constraints? And can we test them in their relationship with the FRs against axiom 1 using the matrix, and axiom 2, which is really to take a look at alternatives and select the one that has the least information. So how do we measure the progress during the design review? Well, has consensus been reached? If we have reached consensus and everybody's okay to go ahead, then we've made progress. If not, have we been able to build consensus, maybe by changing the design decomp? So changes in the design decomp, and maybe in the dictionary, indicate progress in the design. If none of these, then there's no apparent progress, and there's no value has been added. Sometimes we have prolonged discussions in a design review, and these can be a problem if we're not making progress. And sometimes it's because we've lost focus or started confusing designing the equipment with designing the mission, for example. And so we need to bring back in the focus. Sometimes we've ventured outside of the scope of the design. And sometimes we need to acknowledge concerns that have been brought up. And so by acknowledging the concerns, we can move ahead. And sometimes we need to take a look at the problems that are arising and assign these for work outside of the meeting, and then let the meeting go ahead, knowing that you'll come back to that. Here's some collaborative negotiation tactics. Sometimes in a design group, you'll have people bringing up problems or concerns that they have. And sometimes it's going to be difficult to convince them that this will be addressed. And so invite them to state how they will know when this problem that they're bringing up or this concern has been adequately addressed and the problem has been solved. Now, sometimes you just have to record what the points of dispute are to resolve later. Sometimes you need to check the definitions. All right, some concluding remarks. So value needs to be assigned to progress in the design, and the appropriate progress has to be recognized. Developing the upper level FRs is one of the most productive things that can be done. So value should be placed on good decomposition and good compliance with the axioms. Value should be placed on promoting good communications and consensus building. So this, some of this comes with recording the design intent systematically and rigorously, as you need to with the FRs. The actual physical solution grows out of the design intent. We need to make sure there's enough bandwidth so there's good communication. We have the design rules or axioms, and then we need clear links to the design features. So here's the thing to be careful of. Designs are like babies. They almost always look good to the people who made them. So it's easy to get in an argument when everybody wants their part of the design included in the final design. But if we use axiomatic design, then we have a clear set of rules, and so we're not just saying, all right, I want to make sure my stuff gets in the design, but how can we compare two different propositions or two different design solutions? And we use the axioms to do that, and then we can sort out which ones are the best. So the axioms provide us with an objective criteria, for evaluating designs. And this can be necessary to avoid prolonged discussion. So that ends the section on design reviews.